Hello everyone, and welcome. Tonight's story begins with fire tearing across a quiet Texas sky, a crash that should not have happened, a visitor that does not belong to Earth, and a man already drowning in loss. What follows is not just a chase for survival, but a journey where fear, love, and choice collide. When the world turns hostile, who do we become? Stay with us and step into the night where two worlds meet. The sky split apart with a sound like tearing metal. Ethan looked up just as a streak of fire ripped across the Texas night. Too low, too faint. The object tumbled, shedding burning fragments that hissed into the fields. A second later, the shockwave hit. Hot wind slamming his chest, porch boards rattling under his boots, cattle bawled in panic. Then came the impact. The horizon flashed white, followed by a rolling thunder that shook the ground and sent birds exploding from the trees. Ethan was already running before fear caught up, heart hammering, breath raw in his throat. Beyond the fence line, something burned that did not belong to Earth. Smoke rolled low across the pasture, thick and bitter, stinging Ethan's eyes as he climbed the shattered fence. Metal jutted from the crater like broken ribs, glowing along the edges. Something moved inside the wreckage. He slid down the loose dirt, boots skidding on ash, and reached into the torn hull. His hand brushed skin, cool, smooth, faintly luminous. He pulled, and a figure collapsed against him, lighter than he expected, breath coming in thin, rattling pulls through a cracked device at her throat. Blue, not paint, not light. Her skin held its own color, pulsing softly under soot. A distant mechanical hum rose overhead. Ethan looked up and saw red scanning beams slicing through the smoke. Searching. The hum sharpened into a high. Insect whine. Ethan turned just as a black drone slid through the smoke. Lenses glowing red. It hovered, steady as a predator. A thin beam sweeping over the wreckage, then settling on the blue-skinned woman in his arms. Her body jerked as the light traced her spine. A sharp tone pulsed from the machine. Rising. Urgent. Ethan felt it in his teeth. No, he muttered. Grabbing a length of torn alloy, he hurled it. Metal struck metal. The drone staggered, but a signal burst from its core. A spike of white light punching upward through cloud, somewhere far above. Something answered. Ethan smashed the drone into the dirt until sparks died. But the sky was already watching. Fuel hissed from ruptured lines, sharp and chemical. Ethan dragged the blue-skinned woman behind a ridge of dirt, then crawled back to the crater. Heat bit through his jeans. He found a leaking canister, twisted a rag from his sleeve, and shoved it into the stream. One spark. His lighter shook in his hand. Then flame took like dry grass. Fire ran along alien seams, leaping panel to panel. The hull groaned, colors shifting as strange alloys warped. He kicked loose fragments into the heart of it, feeding the blaze until smoke towered black and thick. A secondary pop buckled the frame. He didn't wait. He pulled her farther into the brush as the wreck became a sun, erasing the trail behind them. She gripped his sleeve with trembling fingers, eyes unfocused, breath hitching through the cracked respirator. "Leave," she rasped, voice thin, mechanical undertone flickering. Ethan glanced toward the burning ranch line, sirens distant, getting closer. Turning her in would end the chase. Maybe save the land. His jaw tightened. He remembered his father's voice over barbed wire and sunburn. You don't walk away from someone bleeding. He slid his arm under her shoulders and pulled her upright. "Not happening," he said. Low, steady, overhead. A searchlight cut the smoke. He adjusted her failing mask, sharing his filter for a moment, then guided her toward the tree line, choosing a path that led away from everything he owned. Branches snapped behind them as they pushed into the tree line, breath loud in the dark. The night no longer felt empty. It listened. A spotlight tore across the pasture, white and merciless, skimming the tops of mesquite and oak. Ethan dropped flat, pulling her down with him as dirt and dry leaves filled his mouth. Engines droned above, steady, patient. Red beams swept low, pausing where their footprints cut through dust. Ethan scraped at the ground with his boot, smearing tracks, then dragged her toward a shallow creek bed. Water barely a trickle. Cold mud swallowed their scent. The beam passed inches over them. Humming. It didn't stop, but it didn't leave either. Ethan didn't run blind. He shifted direction twice, cutting through thorn scrub toward a dry arroyo his father had used during drought years. The ground dipped, hiding them from aerial sight. He counted steps, breaths, landmarks, the split cedar, the rusted fence post swallowed by vines. Behind them, drones circled, but sound warped in the ravine, hard to track. He knelt, opened a buried supply tube marked only by a flat stone. Water pouch, protein bars, an old thermal blanket. He pressed the pouch into her hands first. "Slow," he whispered. Survival meant pacing. Panic burned energy. Energy meant life. Above, rotors passed again, searching. But down here, the earth itself helped them disappear. Ethan's thigh throbbed where metal had torn him during the crash, heat spreading under the bandage. He tried to stand and nearly fell. She caught him, fingers cool, steady. From a compartment at her wrist, a seam opened, releasing a faint blue mist that shimmered like dust in moonlight. She pressed her palm over the wound. The mist seeped through cloth, tingling, then burning cold. He clenched his jaw, breath sharp between his teeth, under her touch. The pain dulled, heat draining away, the skin knit, slow but real. She sagged after, weaker, but met his eyes with quiet certainty. Not magic, biology. Two worlds working, or dying, together. Her respirator flickered, a thin alarm stuttering like a dying heartbeat. The readout on her wrist dimmed, numbers falling. Ethan checked his own filter. Half charge left. He didn't hesitate. He pulled the mask from his face, snapped the coupling loose, and pressed the hose toward her intake. "Take it." She shook her head, but the alarm spiked. He sealed the connection, drawing air only in shallow pulls between her breaths. Their foreheads nearly touched, sharing the same thin stream, counting the rhythm together. Inhale, exhale, pause. The ravine held its heat. Dust thick, oxygen poor. Above, rotors thumped. Below, two lives balanced on one filter, measured in breaths, not miles. They waited until the rotors faded, then climbed from the ravine as night settled heavy and cold. No fire, no light, only starlight. They lay beneath a twisted cedar, backs to stone, watching the sky. He pointed to constellations his father had named, lines drawn between distant suns. She answered with stories of crystal forests that rang in the wind, seas that glowed like breathing light. Their voices stayed low, careful, but something eased between words. Out here, hunted, breathing dust and fear. The sky was the same above both of them. Survival wasn't only running. Sometimes it was remembering why life mattered enough to keep moving through the dark. Cold wind moved through the rocks, carrying the dry scent of dust and cedar. She sat close now, conserving warmth, her shoulder brushing his through layers of worn fabric and torn suit mesh. Ethan felt the faint hum beneath her skin, a low vibration like distant machinery, alive but fragile. He didn't pull away. His hand found hers in the dark, calloused fingers against smooth, cool blue. Different textures, different worlds. Same tremor of exhaustion. Above them, satellites crossed the sky like silent hunters, but for a moment neither moved. Contact grounded them more than shelter, in the vastness pressing from all sides. That small point of touch said one thing clearly. Neither of them was facing the night alone. Dawn crept in thin and gray, light spilling over the ridge in a cold line. Ethan watched the horizon, expecting engines, gunships, the end of running. None came. Wind moved through the scrub. Steady, ordinary, beside him. She adjusted the borrowed filter, breathing easier now, color returning faintly beneath her blue skin. The soil where her earlier spores had fallen showed the slightest change. Dust darkened, holding moisture instead of rejecting it. Life answering life. Ethan felt it then. Not safety, but possibility. They weren't just hiding anymore. They were learning how to survive together. Each small step bending the odds. Above them, the sky remained wide, and for the first time since the crash, it didn't feel like a ceiling closing in. They reached an abandoned field by midday. Soil cracked like old bone. Ethan knelt, scooped a handful, let it crumble. Dead ground. No hold for water. She opened the seam at her wrist again, releasing a faint scatter of luminous spores that drifted down like dust motes in sun. He dug shallow furrows with a stick, covered the glow with earth. Hours passed under hard light. Then the change began. The surface darkened, clumping instead of powdering. A thin sheen of moisture gathered where none should be. Ethan pressed his palm flat and felt coolness rising from below. Not a harvest, not yet, but the soil was breathing again, and in that breath was a future. She pricked her finger on a shard of hull metal, a bright bead of blue welling up. Ethan, without thinking, wiped it with his sleeve, his own cut reopening where the fabric tore. The blood touched, red and blue mixing in the weave. A warmth spread, not heat, something deeper, like pressure easing. Her wrist display flickered, symbols cascading, then stabilizing. She pressed her palm to his forearm again. Slower this time, deliberate. The glow didn't just seal skin, it synced, pulse to pulse. Data scrolled across her interface, mapping shared markers, pathways that shouldn't align but did. Not cure all. Compatibility. A bridge written in cells, discovered in dirt and breath. They couldn't risk a long transmission, only a burst. Ethan climbed the rusted frame of an old windmill, hands slipping on flaking metal, while she unpacked a compact alien core, its surface rippling with soft light. He wired it into a broken ranch antenna. Sparks biting his fingers. 30 seconds, she said. Voice thin but steady. Data pulsed from her wrist. Soil regeneration. Shared DNA markers. Atmospheric adaptation. Proof. The core hummed, rising in pitch until the air itself seemed to tighten. Ethan saw a satellite flare above, catching the beam. Somewhere. Someone would see. Then the core went dark, drained. Silence rushed back in, and far away. Engines changed course. The alarm started as a faint tremor against Ethan's shoulder where she leaned, a vibration more felt than heard. Then her respirator light flashed red. Air intake stuttered, pulling in thin. Dust-choked wind that made her chest hitch. She clawed at the unit, fingers slipping. Ethan ripped off his pack, dragging out the spare cartridge he'd salvaged, but the connector didn't match alien fittings. Her breaths came shorter, faster, a rising panic she tried to swallow. He forced himself still, scanning the suit seams, the faint glow pulsing erratically along her collar. Oxygen wasn't just low, it wasn't compatible. Above them, the sky hung wide and empty, offering nothing but distance while her lungs fought for every second. The crack came from nowhere, sharp and flat, swallowed by distance. Ethan felt the impact before the sound reached him, a hard punch low in his side that spun him halfway around. Heat flooded his ribs, breath tearing out in a ragged gasp. He dropped behind a scrub outcrop, vision flashing white at the edges. Dust kicked up inches from his head as another round struck stone. Overhead, a drone banked. Quiet, patient, guiding fire from beyond the ridge. He pressed his palm to the wound. Blood slipped through his fingers. Hot, steady, not deep enough to kill fast, but enough to slow him, enough to make running a question instead of an answer. They stumbled into the canyon without seeing the shape of it, walls rising too steep, too smooth. Ethan's boot slid on loose shale as he pulled her behind a boulder, chest burning, blood soaking his shirt, above. The drone's shadow crossed the rim, then another, rotors echoing off stone until direction meant nothing. The narrow floor funneled them forward, deeper, tighter. No brush, no cover, only rock and sky. She checked her failing respirator. Then the canyon walls, scanning for mineral seams, fractures, anything. A beam cut down from above, white and searching, locking on dust still hanging in the air from their fall. The canyon wasn't shelter, it was a bowl, and they were already inside. The impact above them thudded like distant thunder, and a pulse of blue-white energy washed down the canyon wall. Her suit lights blinked once, twice, then died. The respirator tone flattened into a long, hollow note. She froze, hand at her collar, eyes wide. Ethan saw the seam along her chest go dark, the faint hum beneath her skin falter. Dust hung thick, the air tasted of metal and stone. He tore open his pack, fingers shaking, but his filters were human spec, wrong fittings, wrong mix. She tried to breathe through it, shallow, controlled. Each pull thinner than the last. Above, rotors circled. Below, her suit lay silent, and the canyon offered nothing but walls and sky. Ethan pressed his back to the stone, trying to slow the spin in his head. Blood soaked through the bandage. Warm, sticky, each pulse weaker than the last. The canyon light sharpened, edges too bright, then too far away. He focused on simple things, counting breaths, the grit under his palm, the rhythm of her hand gripping his sleeve. His fingers tingled, numbness creeping up his arm. He tasted iron. Every movement felt delayed, like he was watching himself from a step behind. He knew this slide. He'd seen it in injured cattle, in men who worked past limits. Stay awake. Stay here. The words echoed, but the dark pressed close. Patient. Waiting. She looked up at the strip of sky framed by stone, then back at him, eyes bright with pain and calculation. Above, rotors circled, patient as vultures. A loudspeaker crackled, words lost in the echo, tone unmistakable. Order, promise, threat. She touched the dead seam at her collar, then his bleeding side. If she walked out, hands visible, they might treat him, study her, cage her, cut her open. The math was clean, brutal. Ethan shook his head once, slow, refusing. Surrender meant survival of bodies, extinction of choice. She held his gaze, breathing shallow, and the canyon filled with the weight of a decision that would define who they were. If they lived long enough to be anyone at all. She dragged his arm over her shoulders and pulled him toward a narrow shadow where the canyon wall fractured into old service tunnels, remnants of some forgotten survey project. Inside, the air was still, signal bleed weaker. She opened the alien core again, its light faint, reserves nearly gone. "Not hiding," she said, voice thin but steady. She projected a schematic between them, orbital paths, relay stations, one abandoned uplink tower just beyond the ridge. If they could reach it, they could send everything at once: soil data, DNA proof, environmental compatibility. Not a plea, evidence. Force both worlds to see before soldiers closed in. Ethan nodded through the pain. Running bought time. Truth might buy survival. They broke from the tunnel at first light. Ridge line ahead. Tower silhouette, cutting the sky like a broken tooth. Ethan leaned into her, steps uneven, breath a rasp that fogged the mask. Drones banked wide, searching the canyon floor. Up here, wind tore their noise thin. She pulsed the core once, brief distortion, making a ghost of their heat trail. Veer left. They went right, scrambling over scree that slid like water. A shot cracked stone near Ethan's hand. He didn't look back. The tower grew, cables hanging, panels dead. Every step burned, every heartbeat counted. They reached the base as rotors surged, the air itself tightening around the last run they had. The access hatch groaned open under Ethan's weight. Rust flaking into the wind. Inside, dust lay thick over dead consoles and a skeletal uplink array. She set the alien core on the floor, its glow barely held. Cables dangled from the tower's spine, severed long ago. She peeled back the seam at her wrist, filaments unfurling like pale roots. Searching. Ethan held a loose connector steady while she threaded herself into the port. Light ran up her arm. Sharp, blinding. The room humming as circuits woke from years of silence. Data flooded. Soil. DNA. Atmospheric models, compressing into a single pulse. Outside. Rotors swelled. Inside. She became the bridge, burning through the last of herself to make the link hold. Ethan braced the hatch with a bent steel bar as rounds sparked off the frame, each hit ringing through his bones. The tower shuddered with rotor wash, dust spiraling through broken windows. He sighted along the old ranch rifle, fired once, twice, enough to keep helmets down behind the ridge. His side burned, vision tunneling. But he held position, counting breaths like shots. Inside. The uplink's hum climbed, a thin, rising note that set his teeth on edge. Footsteps pounded closer on metal stairs. He kicked a loose panel into the stairwell. It clattered, buying seconds. "Almost," he muttered, not sure if she could hear. He stayed, because leaving would end everything. Light surged through the tower, cables snapping tight as if pulled by gravity itself. Her body arched, filaments buried deep in the uplink spine, eyes bright with reflected code, symbols cascaded across dead screens, soil regeneration curves, genetic alignments, atmospheric tolerance. The signal climbed in pitch, a pure, cutting tone that bled into the air. Outside, gunfire faltered, helmets turning skyward as satellites flared to life. Catching the beam, the core on the floor cracked along a glowing seam. Draining. She held the link, jaw set, breath shallow. Then the tone peaked and dropped into silence. Above them, something had changed, and it wasn't just the sky. The gunfire stopped first, not a retreat, an interruption. Rotors thinned, drifting outward, their shadows loosening from the tower walls. Ethan stayed on his knee, rifle raised, waiting for the next command to break the pause. None came. Wind moved through the broken windows, carrying dust instead of orders. Outside, soldiers stood in the open, visors tilted toward the sky, comms crackling with voices too distant to make out. She slumped against the console, light fading from her skin, but her breathing steadied. Somewhere above, decisions were being made beyond bullets and borders. The world held its breath, and for the first time since the crash, no one was shooting. Green returned slowly. Then, all at once, where dust once broke underfoot, rows of new growth pushed through darkened soil, leaves thick, stems strong, holding water instead of losing it to the sun. Ethan walked the fence line at dawn, hand trailing across crops that shouldn't exist, roots fed by earth and something older. Farther, irrigation channels ran clear, no chemical burn, no rot. The air smelled alive again, wet soil, plant breath, possibility. Drones still passed overhead sometimes, but higher now, watching, not hunting. Beside the barn, experimental plots shimmered faintly at night, bioluminescent veins threading through leaves. The ranch no longer clung to survival. It produced it. She held the child close against her chest, wrapped in layered fabric to balance temperature and air mix. Tiny breaths rising and falling in a steady rhythm. The baby's skin carried a soft hue between their worlds, faint patterns of light pulsing under the surface when the night grew deep. Ethan watched, afraid to move too fast, as if sound itself could break something this fragile. The child's eyes opened, dark and wide, tracking both of them with quiet focus, as though already aware of the space between stars. No lab lights, no containment glass, just open air, wind through fields, and two exhausted survivors witnessing proof that life had found a way beyond fear. Night settled soft over the fields. Stars spread wide above the quiet ranch. Ethan stood beside her, the child resting between them. Small warmth against the cooling air. The scars on his side ached when he breathed deep, a reminder of what survival had demanded. Her glow was dimmer now, energy spent, but steady. Wind moved through the crops with a low whisper, like distant voices carrying across worlds. No sirens, no rotors, only the slow rhythm of land alive again. They didn't speak. They didn't need to, under the same sky that once watched them hunted and bleeding. 3 lives stood where fear had almost ended everything. Proof that survival had changed them, but not taken who they chose to be. And so, beneath the same stars that once watched them hunted, life begins again. Their scars remain. But so does the proof that survival is more than staying alive. It is choosing hope over fear, connection over division. If this story moved you, there are more journeys waiting beyond the horizon. Follow the channel, stay with us, and listen for the next signal in the dark.